Welcome to Work from the Inside Out, a podcast that highlights real-life stories, practical strategies, and best practices for transitioning your career from unhappiness and dissatisfaction to fulfillment, meaning, and joy. Now here is your host, career and executive coach, Tammy Guler-Loeb.
Hey everybody, I am delighted to introduce today's guest, Susan Spero. Susan is an executive coach and organizational consultant with over 35 years of experience in the field. She has worked in a variety of industries with corporations and nonprofits ranging in size from 5 to 5,000 employees. Last year, she published a book called Harmony at Work, Keys to Tune Up Your Work Relationships. We'll have that in the show notes. It is a practical guide to help people better understand relationship dynamics and learn how to improve their interactions. She uses music as a metaphor to describe how relationships most often evolve. The book integrates popular theories and tools with real-world examples and humorous anecdotes. Each chapter has practice exercises to help the reader apply concepts and reinforce skills. The techniques apply to personal as well as professional relationships. Please join me in welcoming Susan Spero. Welcome, Susan.
Thank you so much, Tammy.
And thank you so much for being here from your home office in Colorado.
Yep.
Let's start at the beginning. As you know, on Work from the Inside Out, we love to talk about the formative years and see how those may or may not have contributed to where you are today. But we love to add that part of the journey. So take us back there.
Well, I think the first two times that I became aware of relationship dynamics and how people interact, one was in third grade when my parents got called in for a conference and they were told that I was too bossy. And I was completely confused because I had no idea what that meant. And I had no idea what I was doing that was coming across as bossy. So that was the first ping on the top of the head. And of my three siblings, the one closest to me in age, Dick and I had a difficult relationship until I was about 14, which was when we started to be friends. But there was so much tension, and I thought he was mean, and he thought I was annoying as a little sister. And when I look at that relationship now from the distance, I say even a very toxic relationship like that can be healed, can be improved. It doesn't have to stay toxic. Probably the next even bigger awareness was when I was 18 and I was hired at a summer camp. And the directors, instead of just hiring a bunch of college kids to watch a bunch of kids for 8 weeks, they really trained us in terms of how to understand and manage group dynamics for two reasons. One, so that we would pull together as a staff team. And two, so that we would understand the dynamics in our camper groups and not just be babysitters, but really help the kids develop socially and emotionally in the 8 weeks that we had them. And that just fascinated me. And much of what I learned from them for 3 summers provided the basis for how I negotiated relationships throughout my adult life, throughout my professional life.
Wow.
The other added benefit was that they were amazing bosses. So when I coach people now and I talk about what could happen and what should happen in your relationships at work, sometimes people look at me cross-eyed and say, yeah, but that never really happens. Do you have any examples where that really happens? And I say, yeah, let me give you an example where they, as leaders, knew how to build trust. They knew how to build openness. They knew how to invite feedback. It made it a phenomenal place to work.
Wow. And how cool is that? Starting at the age of 18, that not only did you get that training, but you even recognized it to the degree that it intrigued you already.
Absolutely.
I bet you also knew at that time that, you probably had friends who were working in other jobs or in other places, and you probably knew, wow, this is unique. I'm learning things here. My friends aren't getting that where they're working.
Not only that, but I had a job in college where the boss was the opposite. And I called the directors of the camp who I stayed friends with. And I said, thanks a lot. And they said, for what? I said, you ruined me. And they said, what are you talking about? I said, I thought all bosses were like you, and you inflated my expectations. And we laughed about that for years. But it was a real awareness point for me that it is possible, but not everybody functions like this.
Right, right. So once you were, what did you study in college?
My first degree was in education, and I wanted to be a teacher. And I taught elementary age kids for 6 years.
Uh-huh.
And again, I was supposed to be focused on the math and reading and social studies curricula. And what I was more interested in was the social and emotional development of the kids and the interactions between the kids, and really to some degree between the faculty members. And that's where my attention tended to go. And so after 6 years, I had a pattern, Tammy, of getting bored every 5 or 6 years. And I was getting bored in my teaching job. And so I went and got a degree in psych and counseling.
I see. And so did that come out of just because you knew that you were just far more interested in those kinds of dynamics in the workplace versus, the sort of the academics and all that?
Exactly. And based on observations I'd made within my classroom, within the faculty, within the interactions with the parents and the community interaction, that was just more intriguing to me. And before I got my master's, I did an internship, which again magnified my awareness, if you will, about dynamics and things like that.
So say a little more about that. That's interesting. You did an internship before you went and did your master's. So was that in between teaching and or were you still teaching when you did that?
I was still teaching.
Oh.
And it was actually a clinical internship in Gestalt therapy. Taught me a lot about dynamics and focusing on process as opposed to content. When they first talked about that, I didn't even know what they were talking about. And then that motivated me to go get a master's in psychology and counseling.
How did you even think to, I'm thinking here, you were teaching for 6 years. You're probably, in your late 20s, maybe 30-ish or so. You're still on the young side in terms of your career. What occurred to you, or how did you even think to go and do an internship in Gestalt therapy? Like, how did that even cross your path?
How did I get there? Most important connections in my life have seemed to be random like that. And quite frankly, there was a death in my family that kind of knocked me sideways. And someone referred me to a Gestalt therapist to work through some of the grief. And I got interested in the process that they were going through to help me in the process of therapy. And they said, well, you seem like a good candidate. Would you like to go through our internship? And I said, sure. And, if you'd asked me a year prior, are you planning on doing an internship in therapy and getting a master's in psychology and counseling? I would have said, of course not. But it was one of many moves that seemed random, and I ended up in the right place.
I hear a lot of people talk about these things that are, that feel random. And yet they land you in the right place at the right time. And I find it fascinating that I think there are other things at play that really land you in the right place at the right time. And it feels random to you in the moment or even in reflection. And yet I would say that there's an element of openness, curiosity, and interest that also lead you to that, because there could have easily been somebody else who was in your shoes who would have said, no, I got enough on my plate already. Thanks anyway. Right.
Absolutely. And it's openness, it's curiosity. It's also, and I don't know how to say this without sounding arrogant, because it's not arrogant. There's an element of courage.
Oh, yeah.
Willingness to take risks, which is not to say you take wild and crazy risks, although I think we tend to do that more when we're younger, but you take calculated risks.
Mm-hmm.
And some people have a high tolerance for risk taking. I'm one of them. If you're talking about like moving to a new place or doing an internship, bungee jumping, not so much.
Okay.
Not that kind of risk taking, but emotional, social, economic risk taking. And other people would never do some of the things I've done, not because they're lesser people, but just they have a lower tolerance for risk taking.
Or different kinds of risks, as you pointed out, right? Like there might be somebody else who would get a thrill out of bungee jumping and say, bring it on, right? And, someone would bring that to you and you'd run in the other direction. So, we're all built a little differently, but I think there is a key point here that's really important, especially when people are trying to consider making some kind of a shift or a change in their life. And for the purposes of this podcast, it's usually professional or career-based. And that is to be open and curious. It doesn't mean you have to commit the rest of your life to something, but to have that level of openness and curiosity does afford you opportunities that you wouldn't otherwise have, right?
Absolutely. And just the openness and the curiosity give you room to explore.
Yes.
And after you explore, you might say, well, that's kind of interesting, but not for me.
Exactly. But the only way you can figure that out is by being open to it and learning about it. And I'm sure that the internship, probably had many different components to it. It's not like, you had to, put your life on the line to do that. It was, experiential, I'm sure. But still, I think there are a lot of different ways to open yourself up to something, to even, on a very intellectual level, get the information you need so that you can then make some other choices for yourself.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I agree completely.
Yeah. So clearly that experience propelled you towards the master's degree. And then you left teaching to pursue graduate school.
Right. And that was a bit of a psychological, emotional bungee jump, if you will, because I had tenure and, that was a secure job, and the people around me stayed in those jobs for 20, 30 years. And it was about the time that I got married and my husband was also leaving his job. So we kind of looked at each other like, are you nuts? Are we nuts? And people asked us how we got through that time. And I said, well, we ate a lot of macaroni and cheese and we didn't go out a lot. We both made the decision. And part of it is, and this relates to what's in the book and what I've done in coaching and things like that, is trusting your gut. Sometimes things look bad on paper or impossible on paper, but your gut says, I can do this. And conversely, sometimes things look great on paper. Your gut says, no, I don't think so. If you can balance weighing the data and doing the analysis and the stuff in the left part of your brain, and then checking in with your gut and saying, but what do I really want to do here? And what really feels right? And when people learn how to trust their gut and balance their gut reactions with the data, they tend to make better decisions.
Yeah. Yeah. I completely agree. That's what the whole inside out approach is. It is about checking in with the gut, but not at the complete exclusion of some logical thinking, right?
Right.
So you did the master's degree, and what came about from there for you?
So there I was with 2 college degrees and I couldn't get a job. And I was doing temporary office work and substitute teaching in the Denver public schools and wondering why I'd gone to college at all. It was one of those head scratcher moments.
Wow.
And finally got a job in a small clinic that worked with pain patients, chronic pain patients. And it was a brilliant clinical model. It was very holistic and progressive and terrific clinically. And the doctor that ran the clinic taught me a lot about how not to manage and how not to run a business.
Oh.
He was the antithesis of my boss at 18. He was ridiculous, and ultimately ended up filing for bankruptcy. I was glad I got out before that happened. I learned a lot about how not to manage. And at the time, I was doing some volunteer consulting, and I knew that my teaching skills and my clinical skills were transferable to business. But I didn't have a clue about how to make that transition. Again, random encounter. I met a guy at a party, and he was doing management training. And I thought, if this guy can do management training, I can do management training.
Sure.
And I asked him to get me a 30-minute informational interview with his boss. And he said, well, I don't think we have any openings. And I said, doesn't matter. Can you get me 30 minutes? And I talked my way into a job that I really was not qualified for. But I learn well on my feet. And when I'm curious and challenged, I tend to do better. And so I learned how to apply my skills to a business setting and doing seminars for people in the workforce, different levels of supervision, leadership. Started doing some consulting and was really having fun until I got bored again. And about 5 years in, I had one of those out-of-body experiences where I was standing in front of a group doing a seminar that I'd done 1,000 times. And I knew I was talking because I could feel my lips moving and I had no idea what I was saying. And I must have been making sense because people were taking notes and raising their hands and engaging me in conversation. And I wasn't home. So I went to my boss and I said, please give me something that has the word new in front of it. And he said, well, actually, you're doing really well with that seminar, and I have 5 more months of that scheduled for you. And something inside me just died. And I went home and I said to my husband, as soon as we refinance the house, I'm leaving. And he got really nervous. And he said, well, what are you going to do? And I said, I don't know, but give me a month. I'll have an identity crisis and I'll figure it out. And so when I left, I was going to take a month off, and 3 people called me and said, until you get a real job, will you do this project? And I said, sure, I'm unemployed, pay me and I'll show up. And one thing led to another. And 6 months later, somebody said to me, so how long have you had your consulting practice? And I kind of looked around behind me like, are you talking to me? And it was another one of those thump on the head moments where I thought, oh my goodness, I guess I'm running a consulting practice. And so I bought a computer and printed a business card, and there I was. And that was 36 years ago.
Wow.
And Tammy, I have to laugh because when folks come and want to have coffee with me and they say, tell me how you started your business and what was your business plan like? My honest answer is A, I didn't have one, and B, I didn't know how to write one 36 years ago.
Right.
It was another one of those random things where I just started by accident, but I trusted my gut, and the rest, as they say, is history. I did not get bored in the last 36 years. I've been having fun.
So what do you think are the ingredients for you about not getting bored or staying engaged? What do you think has been different for you? I mean, between, one of the things that's obvious is clearly you're calling more of the shots. And yet you do have to rely on other people hiring you. So and I think this applies, when I tell people, I say, even though I'm self-employed, I'm always looking for my next job. So I'm always a job seeker, right? I think those of us who are self-employed and working with clients in the way that we do, we're always looking for the next job, so to speak. It's not the same process as people looking for a permanent full-time role in an organization. However, the mindset, though, has some parallels. So what has kept you engaged?
It's a great question. When you asked it, two things came to mind. One is variety. I get bored too easily, and if I'm doing the same thing over and over again. There are plenty of people that are great people and smart and skilled, and they can do the same thing over and over again for years. My brain doesn't work that way. So variety is one of them. And I think the other key element, is feeling like I'm making a difference.
Uh-huh.
In my prior job, people would come and go. One of my colleagues very sarcastically called it spray and pray. They'd come in, we'd, do our song and dance, they'd leave, we'd never see them again.
Yeah.
And there was no carryover. And another little anecdote, I met a guy in the hall when I was working at that job. And he kind of pointed at me and said, "I know you were my teacher." And I said, "Okay, I was leading a seminar. Well, my name's Susan. What's your name?" He told me his name. And I said, and truth be told, unless someone is brilliant or really annoying, if I only see him for a couple of days, I don't remember their name.
Yeah.
So he told me his name, and I said, "Which seminar were you in? Was it this one, or this one?" And he kind of scratched his chin and he said, "I don't remember what the seminar was, but you told some really good jokes." Tammy, if I could have drilled a hole in the floor, I would have gone down in that hole, because if you don't even remember the topic or the name of the seminar, there was no transfer of learning, and there was no impact or value from the seminar.
Mm.
Whereas in the last 36 years, I've had the delicious opportunity to have long-term relationships with people and to follow up with them and to know what is and is not having an impact. And if the work we're doing together is not having an impact, we shift.
Right.
And that's just critically important to me, rather than feeling like I'm going through the motions.
So over the years, you've clearly 36 years, you've had the variety, you've made an impact, made a difference, and you know the difference when it starts to feel like, wash, rinse, and repeat. Tell us about the book and what made you decide to write a book. Because I get the feeling like you're one of these people who doesn't like to sit still for too long.
Both things are true. Very, very observant on your part. I don't like to sit still very long. And ironically, and this has surprised a lot of people that know me, I loved the process of locking myself away and writing. I'm not one of those people that can get up at 5 or 6 and write for an hour every day. I'm not that structured. I needed to jump in, and like at the beginning of the pandemic, I went to the mountains for a week and took food and books and my laptop and my hiking boots and locked myself away for a week and got a ton of writing done. And it was so fun to be just unifocused on one thing instead of juggling lots of balls in the air.
Mm.
So my process tended to be to write it in chunks like that. And it took me several years, because I would start writing and then work would get busy and I'd get stalled out. What motivated me to write the book was to try and summarize the things I've learned over so many years.
Yeah.
And put those ideas together in a very user-friendly manual, if you will, so that when people are looking at their relationships, some people have trouble in what I'm calling stage 1 in the book. How do I get started? How do I decide if I even want to apply for that job? If I want to apply for that promotion, if I want to ask to be considered for that project team. Some people, that's the easy part. Oh yeah, I'll jump in. And it's later when the honeymoon period wears off and the first conflicts start to appear.
Mm-hmm.
Some people run the other direction. Some people fight with both fists. Some people crawl under the desk. And so my goal in the book, I have 6 different stages through which relationships most often evolve. And as you mentioned earlier, I just to make it a little bit different and fun, and because I love music, I use music as a metaphor for how those stages evolve. And each chapter has lots of anecdotes and some of my twisted humor. And the end of each chapter has what I call, since it's a music theme, rehearsals, specific things that people can do to practice whatever skills and approaches are in each chapter. And the people that have read it have told me that I accomplished my goal of making it accessible. And so sometimes people say, well, do I have to read it cover to cover? Sometimes people read it sequentially, and sometimes people go to chapter 4, which is about the conflicts, because that's where they are in the relationship. So each chapter kind of stands alone.
Oh, that's great.
But the goal is to have sort of your own pocket consultant that you can refer to. And the other part of the process that was interesting was 10 years ago when I started, I was working with an agent, and my original concept for the book was not just work. It was personal and work relationships, so that if I get along with someone named Tammy, but I fight with my boss, or I get along with my boss, but I fight with my brother, what can I take from the positive relationship? How can I leverage what I'm doing right with Tammy or my boss and apply that to the relationship where they're static? And this agent, for better or for worse, talked me out of that and said, hard to sell a multi-genre book. Your credentials speak of the work world. Write about work relationships and make the sequel about personal relationships, which cracked me up because I had written 2 chapters and he was talking to me about the sequel. So the book is work relationships, but the concepts and the tools absolutely apply. I always think that commercial, I don't remember what they were advertising, but they say, children, don't try this at home. And I say, please do try this at home. Because the concepts and the tools work in your personal relationships the same as work relationships.
So you look at things, I love the fact that you start with something like, how do I get started? How do I even look at, a job or a work environment to decide, is that a place I can even begin to engage? And then you take them through, like the honeymoon period and into how do I deal with conflict? What are some of the other chapters addressing?
So the first chapter is auditions, and they have musical titles. Do I even bother? Is it worth trying to engage? The second chapter, second stage is the first notes. How do I start the relationship? How do I start the song well, with energy, with gusto? And what are some of the things that go through your head when you're just getting started in a relationship? I've decided that I want to apply for the job. I decided that I want to meet some of my neighbors. I decided that I want some new people to date, whatever it is. What are some of the nonverbal cues, and how do I manage my expectations? How do I deal with what's unexpected? Those kinds of things.
Wonderful.
The third stage is what I call new songs, making beautiful music together. Okay, I've started dating the person. I've taken the job. I accepted the promotion, whatever it is. I've moved to a new department. How do I negotiate those new relationships? Sometimes when I'm coaching someone who's in this position, I give them a little template about, these are some questions you should ask your new boss and your new teammates, or the new people reporting to you because you just got promoted. How do I find out about you and what your work style is and what makes you want to come to work in the morning and what drives you crazy, so that maybe I could avoid some of the landmines I would otherwise step on? And most people find that out sort of by accident.
Yeah.
And that's an example of where I'm not random. I encourage people to be more intentional.
Yes.
About finding out about who am I working with and letting you know about me. If you and I are working together for the first time, I might say things like, I'm a bit of a feedback junkie, and if I'm doing something that's bothering you, please tell me, don't tell Sally over there.
Right.
That's something that I want people to know about me. And I'm more of a big picture person. I can manage the details, but give me the punchline first so I know why I'm hearing these details. So that's part of stage 3. And then stage 4, which is where a lot of people seem to focus, is what I call clashing chords. When we have our first, dissonance, our first conflict. What are the standard conflict resolution tools I can use? And most people have taken or read taken a conflict resolution class or read a book. But my goal here is to help people actually apply those tools to the current situations they're in. And then 2 more stages. The 5th stage I call encores. How do I fine tune the relationships? Okay, I've gotten through the first few conflicts. You and I are still working together. We still like each other. We're still dating. We still like each other, whatever it is. How do I fine tune the relationship and take it to the next level? And then the last stage is what I call finales, knowing if, when, and how to end the song. How do I know, like in my last job, when I came home and said, I'm going to give notice in a month, I felt like I had done everything I could to make the relationships better and make the job more interesting.
Yeah.
As opposed to, okay, it's been kind of rough, but I don't think I should leave yet. I think there's more potential here. There's more juice. And so helping people negotiate those 6 stages.
Yeah.
And the different tools and theories and things that I've learned for the last 40 years, I fit many of them into one or more of those stages.
I love it. I love it. And I think that this is a resource that can help people really at any stage of their career too. That's what I'm loving about this, is that you could be just starting out, you could be mid-career, you could be, trying to decide what you're doing for your 3rd act or deciding about retirement, whatever that is. And there's a lot of gold nuggets in here. There's no doubt about it. And what I'm appreciating is the practical side to it, and the fact that you are illustrating it with real life stories. We're not talking theory here. This is coming right out of your own work, things that you have seen and experienced yourself. It's not like you've never been in the workforce. And I love the fact that you also offer humor in there, because I can appreciate that none of us should take ourselves too seriously, right?
I just wanted, my editor pushed back because I have all these little funny footnotes. And she said, oh, that's going to really mess up the formatting. And I said, we need to figure out a way to do it, because I want to lighten up this topic. I don't, exactly what you said, I don't want people to take themselves too seriously. It's a serious topic, and we have to maintain some sense of humor.
Yes.
If you told me that I couldn't have a sense of humor, I would not have a pulse. I mean, that's how I see it in the world. And some people have trouble maintaining a sense of humor, especially in the middle of conflicts. And the last 3 years, whatever conflicts people had, whatever insecurities people had, they're on steroids because of all the things that have happened in the last 3, 5, 6 years. And so people are walking around angrier and tenser and more worried. And so thank you for what you said about the book. That was absolutely my goal, is to say, here are some tools that fit regardless of where you are in your career,
right,
your life stage. And people have pointed out to me that the things that I started writing about 10 years ago are even more true now.
Oh, yeah.
Because of what we've all gone through and what we're still going through.
Yeah. I mean, this is not a flavor of the week book. This is, as we say, evergreen. It applies now. It'll apply 5 years from now. It applies to whatever we were doing 5 years ago. Relationships, people, our circumstances change, but people, really, it's not that people don't change. I think people can change and adapt, but yet human nature is something we're always working on. And so you're pointing to a lot of different dynamics and circumstances that we have all experienced in one way or another throughout our lives whenever we are engaged in any kind of an organized situation. And, here we're talking about work, of course, but, and I love the fact that you use some dating metaphors in there too, because I think sometimes our relationship to our careers can feel like we're dating somebody, right?
And it's not always a happy marriage.
No. In fact, more often than not, it's not. I mean, we have data that shows us that as well, which is probably why you do what you do and why I do what I do. We're trying to help more people find a happier relationship.
Exactly. And there's a lot of data that documents that many people spend way more time at work and with their work colleagues than they do with their significant other and their family.
So this has been great. This is terrific. I am going to encourage everyone listening to get their hands on your book. What other ways can they learn more about your work or find out more about what you're up to these days?
My website is harmonyatwork.biz, B-I-Z, harmony at work, all one word, .biz. And I would love to hear from people if there are ways that I can be helpful to them individually or their team or whatever.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Okay. And one last question. So a lot of people listening are thinking about what's next for them, where they're going. What would be a key piece of advice that you would give somebody who's considering their next move, their next transition?
I love the question, and I'm going to cheat and give you 3 parts to my answer. But we're having a 3-for-1 sale today, so
okay.
So I really encourage people who are trying to figure out what's next, or they're facing a tough situation or a difficult relationship, to tackle it head on. And I don't mean brashly, but to first of all not give up, not assume, like I thought about my brother when I was 8, that it was never going to get better, but to look at the glass half full and say, what are the positives in this relationship? What are the strengths? And what can I leverage? Even if I'm not going to stay in this relationship or this job, what can I leverage to make the next one better? And the second part of that is what we talked about before. I need to trust my gut. I need to check in with and trust my gut. If something looks good on paper but feels off, examine that. Ask yourself, why? How do I address my concerns? What questions do I have to ask? What do I need to find out? And the third interrelated part of your question is what we also talked about. I have to be willing to take some risks, calculated risks, not crazy risks. Ask myself questions like, what's the worst thing that would happen if I stayed in this current position?
Yeah.
Or what's the worst thing that would happen if I jump ship and I go to a new job? How do I mitigate whatever risks I'm identifying so that, to go back to something you said before, I can be open and I can be curious and I can consider new options and opportunities. And so I see that the optimism part, the trusting my gut part, and the willingness to take risks as being interrelated.
I see that.
Parts of how do I be brave and take it head on.
Well, on that very positive and empowered note, Susan, thank you so much for being here today. This was really informative, and I think that people are going to feel the impact of what you're doing and hopefully got some great takeaways from our conversation. Thank you so much for being here.
You're welcome, and thank you, Tammy. I had a lot of fun.
I hope you enjoyed my interview with Susan Spero. It was so interesting to speak with her and learn about her early life, background, and professional transitions. What is your key takeaway from our interview? If you are interested in any of the resources mentioned in today's podcast, you can find them in the show notes on my website at tammygoulerloeb.com/podcast. Just look for episode 217. Are you anticipating your next professional move? Check out my award-winning book, Work from the Inside Out, break through 9 common obstacles and design a career that fulfills you. It's available in paperback and ebook editions through my website, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, independent bookstores, or through your local library. If you are inspired by this episode with Susan, please share it with your friends and colleagues, and please do subscribe so you don't miss next week's show. Remember, subscribing is always free. Are you enjoying the podcast? I'd love to read your written review on Apple Podcasts. It's easy to find. Just go to my website, tammygoularloeb.com/podcast. Click on the Apple Podcasts button and follow the instructions provided there. You can also help sustain this podcast by buying me a cup of coffee at buymeacupofcoffee.com/TammyGL. Since this podcast is self-funded, I would always appreciate your support. Thank you so much for listening. And remember, it's never too late or too impossible to increase your sense of fulfillment and satisfaction in your work and other meaningful activities. Let me know how it's going for you. I'd love to hear from you. Bye for now.
Thank you for listening to the Work from the Inside Out podcast. For more information, you can find us at www.workfromtheinsideout.com.